So today we're going to start the conversation. We won't get fully into it. We're going to start the conversation about organization, okay, in the context of business environment. What do you see in the picture? But obviously this is military, right? And I suppose the military belongs at one end of the spectrum in terms of organization, defined roles, defined structure, following the rules, etc. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we sort of get to organization and what organization looks like in different organizations and different entities. We look at the military maybe, and we look at some sort of creative, whatever, at the other extreme. So we'll kind of look at all that sort of stuff as to try and start to understand, you know, what do we have to do in the business environment, all right? So that's where we're going to go today. So as I said the last day, did this sort of make sense, this sort of structure? You know, what we're trying to do with this program is give you a good introduction to a number of disciplines, you know, which allow you to sort of recognize and understand the market, allow you to understand sort of capability in entities, businesses or not-for-profits or government departments, allow you to understand the process of change that we all need to be engaging in on an ongoing basis, and also how we manage performance, how we achieve in the market using our capability. And you know, these are like the four themes that we're focused on, all right? And this module is the first one on level 3. Now, there are some other pieces I meant to say to you, you know, the research project managers, which are sort of ongoing things. And every now and then we will have these sort of academic study skills or other sort of standalone modules or standalone 2 modules, which are just designed to help build your capability for doing assignments and for learning and so on. Okay, so that's the context. These are the learning objectives for this module. We want you to know the different types of businesses and their ownership and different types of stakeholders. So, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that today in terms of the different types of business organization, if you like. We'll talk a little bit about stakeholders because stakeholders are important, who we have to sort of be aware of in every situation. So the stakeholders are people who have a stake in the effective performance of the business. And the stakeholders might include a load of people who you might not think, but we'll come to that. All right, we also want to understand how businesses are organized. In particular, we want you to sort of distinguish between 2 types of businesses, any 2 types of businesses you can choose. But we want to understand how businesses are organized. And as out of that, how they focus on achieving their target objective, okay? So what might be their objective? In the most cases, if we think business is about profit, well, there's other objectives as well. So we'll tease into that a bit. And I think most importantly for any organization, trying to start to identify the political, legal, social, economic factors that might affect our business or your business, okay? What's going on that we need to be prepared for, basically, all right? So that's what the learning objectives are. So just to translate that, I guess, what are we here to learn? I want you to be able to identify and understand a business sector or the business sector, one that you choose. So I want you to understand, you know, what's going on here. Who are the competitors? Who's the big players? Who are the small players? You know, where does the supply come from? Who are the customers? How does somebody compete in this sector? So that's kind of what we're looking to do. And again, it's more than just this module. I want you to be able to identify and describe businesses in the sector or in a market or even in a market segment. So if you pick the local area where you live and you talk about the restaurant industry, how many restaurants are there around where you live? I mean, we all know what a restaurant is. How many restaurants are there? How would you classify them? Are they all the same? Are they different? Are there some that are part of a chain, etc.? Who owns them? So how would you describe those elements? Okay. Which leads us into the next one. How are these business structured? How do they work? How does a restaurant work? How does a local grocery store work? How does a power company work? Okay, so what are the things that we need to sort of be aware of? Because if you were setting up a business, what will be the things you need to look at? All right. And then identify the big issues which may impact or change the business or may cause the business to have to do something. Okay. So the big one there, like in the picture, is COVID, of course. COVID came along and hammered a number of businesses, a huge hammered economies. Most businesses had negative impacts. Some had positives. Let's be honest, some businesses grew. Most businesses, though, suffered a bit, didn't they? Yeah, okay. And that was pain for everybody, right? So we want to sort of understand those things and to be able to describe different sectors and so on. So that's what we're about. I think it's important that we understand that what we're looking at is organic. I like to think of it as organic. If you look at any business, we can't just look at it. Well, we do look at it, of course, and we sort of take a snapshot in time, but we have to realize that it's not a photograph. It's actually part of a movie, and that there's a before and that there's a future. And we want to understand what's happening and where it's come from and where it's going. So we want to understand things like the gearing in any organization. So the school year, for example, what drives the school year? Do exams drive the school year? Does enrollment drive the school year? What drives the school year? Does the weather drive the school year? And how does it work? Where do the teachers come from? What do they need to be able to do? How do we get the students? How do we determine if a school is performing well or badly, etc.? And we could do the same thing about a hospital, about any business. So we kind of need to understand the driving forces and the mechanics within the business. So what's the vision and mission of the business? What strategy is it following? And out of that strategy, what are the strategic objectives, which of course should be aligned with the vision and mission? And how do they drive the everyday actions in the business? So we want to think about these things, okay? But the first place we started with the business environment, okay? Everything exists somewhere. Businesses don't exist in isolation. They don't exist in no man's land. They don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in a business environment. And so our focus here is around the combination of internal and external factors that influence a company's operating situation. Internal and external factors. So if you think about it, internally, there could be our factory, there could be our staff, there could be our canteen, there could be the amount of money we have available, there could be the people who owe us money, our debtors, who are kind of inside. They're inside for us because they owe us money, but they're outside because they have their own existence. There could be our creditors or our suppliers who give us the stuff that we work. Might be the government, might be the economy, might be the rules and regulations that exist. Other things might be the customer base and the customer's community. So we exist in a space where we want our customers, but we need to understand our customers are part of a community and they have other demands on them as well. So the business environment includes things like clients and suppliers, competition, owners, who owns us, technology and changes in technology, politics and law and governance and regulation, and of course, market, social and economic trends, including things like advertising, including things like the digital world, all right? So the business environment actually is huge. And we're not going to cover it all in this module, but we're going to start into it to try and understand the universe and some of the components so that we can understand better this business or that business or another business. So, are you guys with me so far? Yep. Okay. Mohsen, have you got a job? Are you working? Or have you had a job before as a student?
Yes. I'm a teacher currently.
You're a teacher. So what am I doing? I'm talking to the
Yeah.
I'm talking
But
to
yeah.
Well, what do you teach?
I teach math and computer.
Okay. So you know about the education world, right?
Yes. Yes.
What do you think is the biggest thing that's happening in education at the moment?
Sorry, can you come again?
What do you think is one of the biggest things that's changing education at the moment?
Oh, I think education can change everything. Like, it can build the future of the nation. So
Yep.
it's a
It's really
important thing. Yeah, it's very important.
okay. So what's going on in the world, in the environment in which education operates? What are some of the key driving forces at the moment for change?
Um, okay, maybe changing the old system, the new system. It's working because uh, the nowadays children, they are more in technologies,
Yep.
and it's a better way to make that happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think
It's kind of, I mean, making interest to the students.
yeah, keeping them engaged. I mean, there's an element for me as a teacher. There's an element of entertainment. Keep people interested. But what I'd also say as well, and you're right. I mean, one of the challenges when I first started out, and we won't say how many years ago that was, a lot of the people who, because I started, my first job as a teacher, a lot of the people who I was teaching with were a lot older, and they were very stuck in their ways. Okay. And as a result, there was a huge resistance to change. Okay. Because education, education. Right? I think now, a number of years later, I think we recognize that there's so much happening and so fast that the education has to adapt. Now, particularly in third level or in further education, where we're talking about skills and capabilities, because you have to meet the market. Primary education, less so. Secondary education, less so. Although in that secondary education, I guess there's still a bit of a move. And one of the things, obviously, is technology. You know, it's not just learning about technology; it's learning using technology. It is just my opinion, also.
Yes,
So
that's true.
I think one of the really interesting things then is this: like we're doing. The reality is, we don't have to be in the same place anymore. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's great to be in a classroom with people as well. I think that helps, but I don't think we need to be in a classroom with the students all the time, which means we can probably leverage in other insights and other educators with different experiences from different places, which is exactly what we're doing here. I mean, you know, I'm 6-7 hours behind you. Okay. So, and again, that's just my opinion. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying that I think that's one of my opinions. And I've been having this discussion with some colleges around Ireland saying, you know what, we've got good educators in some places, and we should be able to look at expanding our portfolio of services, if you like. Equally, there are good educators in other parts of the world who we are starting to compete with. So that's an interesting thing to take on board. And as I said, it's only my opinion, so I stand to be corrected on occasion. But I do think it's an interesting space, and it's tied in with the whole development of the digital world, the technology. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so one of the things we want to do is we want to kind of understand that. So one of the businesses we might look at is a school or a college. Atifa, you're working in an office, it looks like. Is that right? Oh, there you are. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Oh, money exchange. Ooh, you got your hand on the money. Very important. Actually, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. So, are you still dealing with exchanging cash in one currency for another currency primarily, or in cashing checks, or in bank charges, or bank drafts, or whatever? Or do you mean you're doing it electronically? Oh, God. Okay. Okay. All right. So that's an interesting space. I mean, one of the things So I have it here on my phone. I'm still learning to use. You know, down here, I don't know if you can see that. Let me get my camera. So on my iPad there, these two here, or are Revolut or apps. For Revolut is an app we're using here that I'm starting to use for payments. So direct payments. And I guess I'm not massively up on Apple Pay and all those things. But it's basically I can use my phone as to make payments. I can make payments. I can use my bank app is there as well, of course. But Revolut is a way for me to send money to somebody without going anywhere near a bank, or notionally without going anywhere near a bank. Okay, so I think that's interesting. So as a business, it gives us options to try and understand how our customers can pay us. And it's not that, you know, we have to do this, but I think it's tied in with the idea that if we understand who our customer is and what their challenges are, maybe something like Revolut or one of these other online payment mechanisms helps them solve their problem by making it easier for them to buy our product instead of having to go find cash or go use a credit card or whatever. So, I mean, the money exchange is going to be quite interesting, I would have thought. I mean, you guys are probably way too young to remember traveler's checks. Do you know what a traveler's check is? You get a traveler's check. So a traveler's check, have you ever seen one? So if I was traveling to Kuala Lumpur, right, and I'd be looking for, it's in Malaysian rupiah, Malaysian rimbari, isn't it? Ringgit, sorry. Ringgit.
I guess it's ringgit.
Yeah. I knew it started with or, right? So if I'm leaving here, if I'm here and I'm traveling to Kuala Lumpur, in the old days, I don't actually know if you can still get them or not. And I wanted to bring money with me, but I don't want to bring cash because, you know, cash could be, well, it can be lost or stolen. So I might buy traveler's checks. Now, traveler's checks can also be lost or stolen, but what they wear is an instruction, basically. So I would go to my bank here and I would say, okay, I have €1,000. I want to buy €1,000 worth of Malaysian ringgits. So they would give me, let's say it's 20,000 or 10,000 Malaysian ringgits. They would give me a traveler's check for that amount. And then when I get to Kuala Lumpur and I go to your money office, I might have 5 of these checks for, I don't know, 2,000 each, we'll say. And I might go to you and I might say, I want to cash one of these checks, one of these 2,000 checks. So I want to get 2,000 ringgits from you. I'd give you the check. I would sign it and they would check it, check identity and so on. And then you would give me the 2,000. And you would then be a clearinghouse effectively for that check. So it operates like an ordinary check. It's just a way for us to buy different currency. So using a check within the currency area is one thing, but to go cross currency as a punter, as an individual. So, but it was still paper based, wasn't it? Still paper based. Nowadays, of course, my card has the little logo on it, so I can use my card anywhere basically, or we can use Visa or whatever. It's not, I don't think, I haven't seen a traveler's check in a long time. I wouldn't use them myself now. I don't need to because, well, I live in the Eurozone, so I'm traveling in Europe. I just use euro. It's the same as a bank machine here, right? And of course, credit cards. You can use your credit cards anywhere. But if you wanted to bring a sizable amount of money, you know, I suppose you might send the money electronically. I guess there are different ways. But I suppose it's the idea that I want to have the equivalent of €1,000 available in Kuala Lumpur when I get there. How do I do that safely? Okay. Now, there are other sources of business and other rationales in money office as well. I guess some of what you probably do too would be cashing wages checks. Do you still do that? Yeah. Okay. And you probably do some currency exchange as well, do you? So if I fly into Kuala Lumpur with dollars and I want local ringgits, you know, I do an exchange rate. And I'm assuming that the exchange rate in the money office is favorable to the business. And I'm sure the exchange rate changes in line with what the bank's doing, but it's always a little bit more in favor of the business than the customer, because it has to be. You have to make money somehow, right? Okay. All right. So in both of your situations, both of your environments, technology is having an impact. There are rules and regulations about education, about money laundering, I guess, about how much money you can hold. There's safety and security concerns, which are different in each place. So safety and security in Tifa's office, it's all about the money, I guess, the safe, where in Mohsen, it's more about protecting the kids, right? But there are, you know, there are similar and disparate or different aspects of the organization. But in every case, there are service users or clients or customers. There are suppliers, various different ways, whether skills or technology or equipment or whatever, or cash. Okay. There's oversight and regulation, and it might vary country to country. It might even vary district to district. Competition, there will be competition. Like, we are subject to competition. I imagine, Atifa, hi Adam, I imagine, Atifa, that competition is quite tough in the money exchange business, because it's not just other money exchange offices, you're competing with banks as well, and now apps and online transactions. Would that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Is there competition in education, Mohsen?
Yes.
Yeah, because you're competing for students as well, aren't you? Adam, we're talking about where people work. Do you have a job? Adam, have you a job?
I do not have one.
Oh, have you had one before?
No.
Okay. So we've just been talking about different organizations. So and what some of the factors that exist that shape their existence, basically. So that's what we mean when we talk about business environment. So over this module, and in fact into other modules, we're going to start talking about these terms, right? These sort of concepts and considerations. Actually, that reminds me, I'm going to give you a document which isn't just for this course. It's for all your courses, really. I'm going to give you a lexicon. Okay, so what I've done for another piece, I've got like a listing of business terms and what they mean. So some of these might be on it. So, you know, we need to think about things like the market. Like, we think we know what the market is, and we do to a certain extent, but there's a lot more going on, I guess, that we'll get into in more detail, particularly when we talk about marketing. We need to sort of bear in mind concepts like freedom of choice. Freedom of choice. Now, none of us has absolute freedom, because there are rules in our respective societies. But we have freedom of choice in the markets in terms of what we buy, in the main, don't we? We have freedom of choice to go to Atifa's office if we want to exchange money. We have freedom of choice to go to Mohsen school or to go to some other school. Okay, so freedom of choice is an important concept, and because the other side of that is, well, how do we get people to choose us? We'll deal with things like risk and rewards. So managing risk is an interesting concept. You know, we've got to talk about the fact that if we're going to start a business, or if we're going to grow a business, or if we're going to look to take a job, there's a risk. There's a risk the business could go bust. There's a risk the customers might not like the business. There's a risk that our products might fail. Equally, there's a potential for reward that if we get involved in something and it goes well, that we get rewards out of it. So we need to think about things like that. We also absolutely need to think about innovation. I think we can't exist anymore without being aware of and seeking innovation. Not just for innovation's sake, but to make sure that we're continually aligned with what the requirements of our customers or service users are. I think we also need to bear in mind that most of what we're doing is about solving problems. If you're a restaurant, what problem are you solving? What problem are we solving if we're running a restaurant? Yeah, and it's simple, it's hunger, okay? Absolutely right, Latifa, it's simple, it's hunger. It might also be fun. It might also be, you know, entertainment. It might also be facilitating dating, right? It might also be facilitating business meetings, having a place where somebody can go for a discussion or for gatherings, absolutely. It might be solving a problem that, you know what, I really, really would like. I'd love to go to have a nasi goreng, which is quite exotic where I am, because, you know, I'm in Ireland. We don't have that many Malaysian restaurants. We only got a couple. But that might be the problem that the restaurant is solving. School is solving a different problem. If it's in business, we're normally focused on needs and wants. But there are other organizations which aren't just profit focused. So we have organizations which are focused on solving national or societal problems, like, you know, tax collection, like medical services, like other things. Price could be an issue, of course. And, you know, one of the things actually, because I work in the not-for-profit as well as the profit sector. And I think what we can find is that not-for-profits, charities, not-for-profit organizations sometimes have to be much more innovative and have to make much better use of their resources than for-profit companies, because they don't have this access to the same level of resources. So they have to make what they have go further. So they can be quite useful to look at it from our point of view. We need to think about resources and productivity. Productivity is always a great term, you know, it causes untold rows, particularly when there's industrial relations or unions involved. One of the key words is value. We have to talk about value. Now, I don't mean personal values, although that's part of it too. I mean value. If we're going to be in business, if we're going to provide a service or a product, whether it's for profit or not, it's only going to work if somebody values what we're doing, okay? So students are only going to turn up to your class most then if they're learning. Okay, they might be forced to go by their parents, they might be forced to go by somebody else, but in reality, they're not really going to check in and give it their best unless they're getting some sort of value out of it, okay? Same with this. I mean, I have to try and keep your attention and keep you guys focused to make sure that you're getting value out of this as well. Okay, the same thing occurs even in your money exchange office or in a hotel. The customer has to feel they're getting value, that their problem is being addressed, and the money that they're parting with is buying them something of value that they're willing to do. Because if they get a sense that what they're paying is worth more than what they're getting, they're not going to be a customer very long. They're not going to be a service user very long. So we need to get our heads around that idea of value. The last two are a little bit more complex. The tragedy of the commons is something we'll probably revisit. It's this idea that the tragedy of commons refers to a book or an article, I can't remember which, and it's this idea that we're consuming resources. So the commons are things that we have in common. So actually, we share the same air. We share the seas. We share, you know, if we're eating fish, we're eating fish which aren't owned by anybody else because they're caught in the sea. They're part of the commons. They're not owned by anybody. They're part of everybody on everything. Okay. So the tragedy of the commons in one sense is how we've divided up and own everything somewhat. We've created ownership over everything, over land, over seas, over components that we take out of the ground. And as a result, we trade them. But while we might say that your country or my country has a fishery zone or our territorial waters, the reality is most of the planet is water. So beyond that, there's a huge amount of water that's not owned by anybody, and it can't be. And even if it was owned, you know, let's say we were Indonesia and Malaysia, and you know, we have a border, and there's a nice big fish in Malaysian waters. Who owns it? What if the fish swims across into Indonesian waters? Who owns it now? So this idea of how we use resources is really important. And finally, the stories we tell, which I'm not going to get into now. We'll talk about communication again. With a module on communications, and the second one in level 4 as well. Okay, so those are some of the concepts and considerations that we need to get to grips with. Okay, so let's move on. Let's then start talking about business cases and business examples, and start looking at or start getting towards when we have to talk about business structures, etc. Now, when we talk about businesses, we can talk about businesses and enterprises. Okay, I kind of use them interchangeably, and they pretty much are interchangeable terms. I'll give you a couple of definitions in a minute, but you know, what are we talking about? We could be talking about something like this here. Well, here's a restaurant. I quite often talk about a restaurant because I think a restaurant is pretty much a universal experience. We've all experienced restaurants. Okay, we've all been to one, or have worked in one, or have walked past one, I would imagine, or I've seen one. So, and I think restaurants are perfect little businesses, particularly an independent restaurant, because it has to do everything. It has to do production, it has to do customer service, it has to do marketing, it has to deal with suppliers, it has got to deal with taking money in, it's got to deal with managing staff, even though in some cases staff are mainly family, that's beside the point. So, but the restaurant is always a good little organization to look at, because it's a cash business. It's driven by, you know, real demand, in that if it's not doing its job, there's not going to be any demand. Okay. We might talk about a print shop. So we have them here like Snap Print or Pronto Print or whatever, and they're normally franchise businesses. So we might open a small fast print shop locally on the basis that we buy into some sort of big existing entity, and this is going to be our store. We're going to operate it under somebody's brand. Actually, McDonald's is a franchise business. So most McDonald's restaurants are franchises. Okay. Of course, we could talk about a grocery store, which is, you know, retail is as old as society in some ways. Well, it's as old as money, I suppose. Or we could talk about, you know, a courier business. You know, I could have a van or a bus or a bike, and I can be a business as a courier. Okay. So we can talk about businesses in all sorts of scales. All right. But what we're going to keep coming back to time and time again is, where is value created? Where is value created? Value is created through work generally. It's by doing something with something to give a new solution. Okay, so it says there it's created through a reversible process, an irreversible process, which gives a resources, order, greater usefulness to others. Let's translate that. It's created when I do something that adds value to what I started with. So if I take a lump of wood and I carve that wood into an ornament, I've done some work. I've actually stripped away some of the wood. I've gotten rid of some of it, but I've created something that's could be a work of art or could be an ornament. And therefore, if I go to sell it, I'm going to sell it for more than the cost of the wood, because I've added value to it. Okay. If you buy a packet of rice, okay, and you buy half a dozen eggs, so you can sell them on as eggs and rice, okay, or you can cook the rice, right? You can cook the rice. Here's what I get into. Here's what I show that I've learned a little bit, right? You boil our rice, we cool it, and then we stir fry it, don't we? And we might throw in an egg, and we can create egg stir-fried rice. Now, as soon as we do that, the product is no longer the rice, it's no longer the eggs, it's now a cooked dish, isn't it? So we've added value, okay? And therefore, we would hope that somebody would be willing to buy that dish and pay us more than the cost of the rice and the eggs alone, because they're paying us for the value that we have added to the product. And business is about that. Business is about recognizing that Atifa or Adam or Mohsen or Shane has a need or has something they want, And it's about figuring out how can we solve their problem in a way that they perceive and they experience value and they pay us for it accordingly. That's what we're about, okay? So all business begins with value creation. The purpose of business is to create and deliver value in an efficient way that will generate profit after cost. Everything we do should be about value creation, whether it's cooking a meal in a restaurant, whether it's delivering a package across the city or across the state, whether it's, you know, making goods available to purchase locally. Right? I mean, the great thing about retail is I don't have to go to the garment factory to buy a pair of jeans. I can go to the store and buy a pair of jeans. And at the store, I can choose from, you know, the ones that fit me and the ones that don't. Okay. So the retailer, if it's a grocery store or a clothing store or whatever, the value they're adding is they're bringing stuff together in a way that makes it possible for me to buy stuff where I want to buy it, which is locally. Okay. Now, of course, they're facing more competition online, but that's a separate issue. We'll come to that. So what we're talking about is this idea of value creation. How now, the first challenge is to recognize what value the customer is looking for. The second challenge is to figure out how to provide it. And the third challenge then is to build a business around it, okay? Which is why something like this is really interesting. So you guys all know Airbnb, right? So I'm off on a holiday shortly, in a few weeks' time, to Spain. Woohoo! 3 years because of COVID, I haven't been anywhere. And we're staying in a place which we rented on Airbnb. So on this place, there's somebody who owns this property we're staying in. They're the host. This is me. I'm the guest. We're flying to Spain. I just want to. I don't care where. I just want to be somewhere where it's warm and where we can eat Spanish food. Okay. So I'm looking for somewhere to stay. Now I could stay in a hotel. I could go on, Hilton Hotels or one of these places on Book Hotel, or I could sort of maybe identify a location somewhere a bit different and find a property, right? How would I go about doing that? Well, I do that by going to Airbnb now, right? So Airbnb is a business. It provides an opportunity for me to identify a potential supplier of a venue. It provides an opportunity for the host, for somebody who owns a property, to generate some income by potentially making their place available to people like me. Okay, so what this diagram shows is kind of where value is moving here. So Airbnb is a website. That's what it is. It's a website, and the host, right, has created a page on Airbnb's website where they've put up their information. Okay, they've created their profile. It's held on the site. I visit the site. I go looking for places with certain parameters in certain locations, and that comes through to me. Okay. I find out about this place from there and I decide to book it, okay? So I like the pricing and everything else, and Airbnb facilitates that. So I end up paying the host through Airbnb for their property, plus I pay a 3% booking amount to Airbnb or whatever the percentage is now. So I pay, for me, it's all one fee. Now, it might be detailed on the page, but I pay it out. That's where it is, right? They provide me free space. They meet me. They give me the keys. They let me use the space, etc. Well, hopefully they will. Okay. And after that, I'm going to have a good experience, hopefully. And then I might give feedback on the property. Okay. Airbnb will transfer the money, of course, when it's ready. They provide the listing space. They're going to transfer the fees. The fees are going to go to the host through Airbnb, so they'll hold it until I've done it, and they'll manage the profiles on the back of it. Okay, what this is a business model. It shows where value is created and who the value is accessed by. In this case, Airbnb has identified 2 potential customers, and it's found a way to be the integrator between them. So actually, Airbnb is the green line here. And all of these people here are the potential venues, and all these people here are the people looking for somewhere to stay. And Airbnb creates this portfolio, this interface where one can find the other and facilitates the transaction. Now they want it to work because the more it works, the better it is for Airbnb. They get 3% of every transaction. And I'm happy I get somewhere to stay. The host's happy they earn some money. It's a win-win-win situation. But value is created in different ways here. Value is created by creating this marketplace for properties where people desiring them can visit them. There's a kind of a quid pro quo around it, or a reversal of that, whereas hosts can decide if they want to accept the guest, possibly based on the guest's profile and ratings as well. So it's a bit of that too. But look, it works, and we know it works. Okay. So in this case, we can see where value is added in different ways. Is that okay? Now, we'll come back to Airbnb again, by the way, but I just want to sort of talk about it first off. Yeah. So if you think about it, Airbnb has to exist in different ways. It exists on the web, of course, but the website has to be owned by somebody. It has to be maintained by somebody. It has to be hosted somewhere. Right? So there's questions about, well, what actually is Airbnb? Is it a person? Is it a company? Is it a partnership? Where is it based? What laws apply? So these are the types of things that we need to start asking questions about and answering as we start to understand the value and the transaction types. Let's talk about another example. Who are these guys?
Salesman.
They look like salesmen, yeah. No, but they're not. I don't expect you to guess their names. This is a still from a movie from the 1970s. Okay, so this actually is Robert Redford, the actor, and this is Dustin Hoffman. Okay, right, and they're in a movie together, and it's a newspaper movie. Well, it's set in a newspaper, so they're playing reporters. Actually, if you guys have been watching CNN at all in the last 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, 6 months, you will have seen these guys on CNN. This is the real guys that they're playing back then. These are the two guys that they were playing. This is the guy that Dustin Hoffman was playing. Dustin Hoffman here was playing this guy. It's Carl Bernstein. And the other guy, Robert Redford, was playing is Bob Woodward. Actually, let me just do one thing. Any idea why those guys are famous?
What's that, sir? I couldn't hear properly.
And any idea why those two guys are famous names? Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. No?
Is it because of the movie?
No, although I suppose the movie celebrated them certainly. But what was it that they did? They were reporters. This is them as they are today, right? This is Bernstein, this is Woodward. So you'll see them on CNN if you watch the cable news. Okay. They were reporters with the Washington Post. So the Washington Post is a newspaper, famous newspaper in Washington. In many ways, the paper of record. This is a front page from several years ago. The Washington Post is famous because these are the two guys who broke the Watergate story. Do you know Watergate?
No.
Oh, okay. So Watergate brought down Richard Nixon. Okay, he was president of the United States from 68 to about 74. He was in his second term when he had to resign. So all the stuff that's going on with Trump at the moment, they're comparing this to Nixon, and what they're saying in many ways is that this is far worse than Nixon. Nixon was brought down because he was basically, trying to manipulate the election and all that sort of stuff. Now, what's interesting is he had to resign in his second term when he couldn't be re-elected anyway. But one of the things that came out was that he was taping people and blackmailing people and so on. Okay. but these two reporters broke the story because they were young reporters and they picked up on this, what was a burglary. There was a burglary at the Democratic Party's head offices in Washington. And these guys got the story. So it was just a burglary, but they picked up and they ran with the story and they started to unravel this stuff, this conspiracy in the background, which ultimately led to President Nixon having to resign. Okay. So it's a really interesting story. The movie they were in was called All the President's Men. It's worthwhile watching if you get a chance, if you're a bit of a history buff for politics, whatever. But
Sir, could you write the name of the movie?
All the President's Men, which is the title of the book they wrote on the back of.
Oh,
they reporters. Their stuff was serialized in the Washington Post, but they wrote this book called All the President's Men, which is what the movie was about. And it tells the story. It's actually quite a good book, to be honest. I've read it. But my point is, what business were they in? What business were they in? They were working for the Washington Post.
Media?
See, I think that's what's interesting. You know, most people would say newspapers, first of all, and they kind of were, but actually newspapers, it's the news business, which sometimes referred to as the media, certainly, but it is news, right? It's the news business. That's the business they were in. They were in the business of capturing news and selling access to news. Does that make sense?
You mean fake or real news?
Let's stick with real for the moment, right? Let's park fake news. Fake news is a construct from Trump in many ways. I'm not saying that there isn't fake news, but let's get out of the Trump's swamp for the minute.
Seems you're not happy with Republicans.
Oh, I'm not happy with Trump. I don't like corruption. That's my point. But
Okay.
like the thing is, have you guys? When was the last time any of you bought a newspaper?
6 years ago.
6 years ago, Mohsen? Okay, that's not too bad. Tifa, you can't remember. Adam?
A really long time ago. I do not remember exactly.
Really long time ago. Okay. Why? Why haven't you bought one recently?
Because they have been moved to digital media.
Right. That's exactly it. Okay. The way that we consume news and even what we consume as news has changed, hasn't it? So when these guys in the 19s, well, it's everywhere and now accessible. Yeah, you're right. Atifa, you're dead right. But I'm not sure about the quality of it. This is where the fake news piece comes into it. But let's park that for the minute. When these guys were writing the story in the Washington Post, people got their news from one of three sources. And in many cases, they got it from two of the three, and sometimes three of the three. The three sources were newspapers, okay? The daily newspaper. So when I was growing up, we used to have the Evening Press was the newspaper that came home in the evening. Every evening, you know, my dad brought the newspaper home with him. Evening Press it was. Or we'd be sent down to buy the Evening Press, which was printed somewhere around the middle of the day. So if you got it later in the day, you got any news that had been added to it during the day. Okay. And, you know, in many households, you'd also get the morning paper. There'd be the morning newspaper and the evening newspaper. Okay. And certainly after the evening newspaper started to go, we had the daily newspaper, the morning newspaper in every day. It was the Irish Independent here or the Irish Times, and it would be got every day. And we would have it here and we would read it. And it was printed 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday. And then there was the Sunday papers. Okay. But everybody bought the paper. Most households bought a newspaper. It might be a big paper, it might be a small paper, it might be a tabloid, but they bought a paper. And that was the primary source of news. And if you think about it, once it was printed, it was there. It could go on a shelf. You could put it down a month later, a year later. The story was there, okay? They also got their news from radio, of course, radio and television, which is kind of where we get a lot of our news now. but they were in the news business, and these guys were in the newspaper business. So their job was to capture news, to write the stories so that people were informed. And you bought the paper to get the news, right? That was the idea, okay? The problem is nobody buys newspapers anymore, okay? As Atifa says, it's pretty much everywhere. Or as as Adam says, we get it online, okay? So the business has changed, hasn't it? It's boring as well. Okay, Atifa, I get it. It can be boring, yes. And that's part of the challenge too. How do you compete when, you've got Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, WhatsApp? How do you compete with all of this sort of stuff, right? So, as a business, what value did they add? Well, the value that they added was access to information. It wasn't the paper. I had one recently. Oh, somebody bought one. I borrowed it from their house. They gave it to me. So this is the business section of the Sunday paper, right? So it's not this that you're buying, right? The newspaper. It's not this. It's, in this case, it's fishing groups sign up to huge win plan. Okay, don't know what that's about. Version 1 staff to share 8 million bonus. Wish I was one of them. Hotel transactions soaring above pre-COVID levels. There we go, down there. And that is by Irish hotel business. Okay. And so what I would be buying would be, this newspaper costs about, I want to say €3. Let me see. There's the main part. There's a Sunday paper, Sunday Independent. It's wow, €3.90. So it's €4. Let's call that close to $5 for this on a Sunday. A big story about Bono. Bono had it too. And anyway, that's the stuff. So people aren't buying it for the paper, although you're getting paper. They're buying it for what the paper conveys, for the news it contains. Okay. That's what these guys were selling. Now, to produce a newspaper, to do that, we had technology, right? So when back in the day, when those guys were writing their stories and producing their news, this is what the technology involved. It involved movable type, where there'll be a big plate made for each page, and that would be based on the words. They would be typing the stories in. It would be typed into another machine where this metal will be melted and formed into the words, so they could make these blocks of text to put into these big heavy metal plates that went on the machine, and then the machine went really fast and printed the newspaper. Right? Very complex process. Okay, so lots of heavy equipment that had to run every day for a few hours. Okay, needed staff and everything else. All right, just to produce the newspaper that would then have to be distributed, so people would buy it in the store, which means they'd be paying cash in the store would be buying it off the paper, or distributor buying it off the paper, and that whole cycle repeated every day. And yet, what we have now, even though it's boring, right? What we have now is we bypass the physical production. We bypass the printing. We bypass the distribution. We bypass the buying it up at the store locally and it being on a shelf locally or on a newsstand. Now, there are still newspapers like that, but the volume is going down year on year. Every year it's going down, because now we get it on the tablet. We get it on our phone. We get it on our laptop. So the story is still written. We're not producing the same volume in terms of the physical piece, although they do some, but some newspapers have gone digital only, and the customer is still getting the value. So the value piece has adapted, although the core of it's still the same. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting business model to look at, because, and that's all changed in my lifetime, right? Some of it is all changed in your lifetime. the reality is now, news is no longer a written article as much. Now it's a video clip. It's a sound cloud thing, or it's a podcast, or it's well, radio is still there. I mean, radio is still part of this. We still write the same. The reporters can still write the story and then describe it on radio, so it gets delivered via a different mechanism. But the core aspect of finding the story and getting the information and writing the story, certainly for the good reporters, that's still the same. It's all of the other stuff has changed. Okay, so what does that mean for the business? It means that the environment is changing, and therefore the businesses have to adapt. They have to adapt. So look, we'll pick that up the next day, and we'll go into that in some more detail. But we'll also then talk about, well, what type of organizations exist in this space? Are they companies? What does a company mean, and how are they structured, etc.?